Hey everyone, and welcome to another Explainer. Today we're diving into a genuinely epic story. I want you to imagine a world 5,000 years ago that functioned remarkably like ours. We're talking about humanity's first complex, globalized society. A world totally packed with massive urban centers, bustling international trade, dazzling luxury goods, and intense political diplomacy. It was this incredible golden era built on a revolutionary technological breakthrough, and it lasted for nearly 2,000 years. But then, historically speaking anyway, it all came crashing down in the blink of an eye. The grand palaces burned, entire writing systems just vanished, and the global economy completely shattered. So how did humanity build its first great international civilization, and why on earth did it fall so hard?
Okay, let's dive into this. Today we're going to cover the first tech boom, the rise of complex societies, the first global economy, a new age of war, the Bronze Age collapse, and finally, lessons for our modern world.
Section 1. The first tech boom.
So before this era, wealth basically consisted of crops and cattle. Stuff that eventually rots or dies. But around 3000 BC, humanity discovers bronze. And suddenly, they've created a form of wealth that is durable, hoardable, and entirely recyclable. It was a total game changer. Now, figuring out how to actually make this incredibly versatile metal wasn't exactly a smooth process. The ancients initially discovered that heating native copper that happened to contain arsenic made bronze. The rather huge, glaring problem, though, was that if you heat up copper with arsenic and breathe it in, well, you're not going to live very long. They very quickly realized this lethal process desperately needed a safer alternative. And they actually found the magic formula by replacing that deadly arsenic with tin, specifically using a ratio of about 90% copper to 10% tin. You get strong, durable bronze. And bonus, you don't die while making it. This absolutely crucial 90-10 recipe became the foundational technology that kicked off an entirely new era. This new metal was infinitely more useful than things like gold or silver. You could make tough agricultural tools, hunting spears, grave goods, the whole shebang. And the best part, when a tool got dull or worn out, its value didn't drop at all. You just melted it right back down and made something else. It was literally the ultimate tech boom.
Section 2. The rise of complex societies.
All this new, durable wealth fueled massive urbanization. We're talking about settlements exploding from tiny little groups into highly stratified, complex societies. And the scale of this was just staggering. During the Bronze Age, the population of Egypt's ancient capital, Thebes, swelled to 80,000 people. Over in Mesopotamia, the city of Uruk had roughly the same number. To put that into perspective, that is a massive metropolis for the ancient world. Suddenly, not every single person had to be a farmer to survive. So, we see the birth of specialized professions, distinct social classes, and elites who controlled the surplus. To keep these giant, bustling cities running, they had to invent large-scale administrative systems, organized religion, complex taxation, and recognizable legal frameworks, like Hammurabi's Law Code, to regulate everything from marriage to debt.
And this brilliantly illustrates one of the greatest inventions born out of all this complexity: writing. The elites desperately needed a way to track all this new tax revenue and trade. In Mesopotamia, they developed cuneiform. These were small, wedged clay tablets used strictly for everyday administrative record-keeping. Think of it kind of like a bird stepping in ink and walking across the page, which they made by pressing reeds into wet clay. On the flip side, you have Egyptian hieroglyphics, which served a totally different purpose right from the start. Designed for large, monumental sculpture and paintings, it had to be visually artful to match the grand elite artwork. But regardless of the style, both systems were absolutely vital for managing these massive new states.
Now, becoming a professional scribe back then was intense. Ancient texts read like these aggressive advertisements for scribe school, basically saying, being a farmer is horrible, being a soldier is incredibly dangerous, just be a scribe instead. Scribes handled the highest levels of diplomacy, carrying incredible weight on their shoulders. But what's amazing is how wonderfully human they were. Sometimes, tucked away on these very dry, formal diplomatic letters sent between kings, we actually find handwritten ink inscriptions from one scribe to the other, the guys who were actually translating the text. They read essentially like, "Hey Joe, it's Phil. How's the wife and kids? Oh, by the way, when you read this out loud to the king later, please emphasize the third line down." It is just a fantastic, relatable reminder of the everyday humanity hidden in our ancient past.
Section 3. The first global economy.
This era also produced what was arguably the world's first true consumer society,
A massive abundance of food meant the elites could trade their surplus to decorate their palaces and really show off their status. And the trade web required to feed this pursuit of luxury goods was unbelievably vast. Cyprus, for example, was one of the largest sources of copper. Actually, fun fact, the word Cyprus gives us the modern word for copper. But tin, that other absolutely essential half of bronze, was incredibly rare and had to come all the way from places like Afghanistan. They were bringing in Baltic amber from Northern Europe, while the Minoans were producing this incredible purple dye from sea mollusks in the Aegean. To connect all of this, they had to cross the sea. The invention of the sail was a massive breakthrough, allowing these societies to plug into an international trade network over the open ocean.
If you want hard proof of just how connected this world truly was, look no further than the Uluburun shipwreck. Discovered off the coast of Turkey and dating back to around 1300 BC, this 50-foot ship went down carrying a staggering 20 tons of cargo. And it wasn't just a local delivery run. Archaeologists found more than 18,000 artifacts on board, originating from at least 7 different cultures. It had ebony from Egypt, elephant tusks, Baltic amber beads, and massive ingots of copper and glass. It was literally a floating international supermarket.
At the very top of this global trade network was royal gift-giving, which was totally critical to ancient diplomacy. Rulers traded what they had for what they coveted most, just to maintain good political relations. We actually have texts of kings writing directly to the Pharaoh of Egypt, demanding, "I know that gold is like dust in your country. Why aren't you sending me more gold?" It just goes to show that their obsession with shiny prestige and hoarding wealth was exactly as intense as ours is today.
Section 4. A New Age of War.
Now, with all this incredible wealth and intense competition for resources, we inevitably reach the much darker side of this technology. Because alloyed bronze keeps a razor-sharp edge and doesn't bend like soft copper does, it completely revolutionized warfare. An arms race built up rapidly. By 2500 BC, the Sumerians in Mesopotamia had established the earliest professional standing armies, complete with body armor, disciplined formations, and the first missile troops. From there, new technologies repeatedly tipped the scales of power. Around 1720 BC, a mysterious group called the Hyksos swept in and completely took over Egypt using a brand new type of chariot and the composite bow, which could shoot twice as far as regular bows. But by 1550 BC, the Egyptians had adopted those exact same chariots, kicked the Hyksos out, and transformed themselves into a conquering military powerhouse with massive army divisions, 5,000 strong.
Meanwhile, over in the Aegean, the Mycenaeans emerged as a fiercely powerful warrior society. These are the very people who, as the legend goes, fought the Trojan War. For these elites, weapons weren't just functional tools used for fighting. They became highly decorated, powerful symbols of status and diplomacy. Elite men were buried with their prized short swords and massive figure-8 shields. They wore these incredible helmets covered entirely in boar's tusks, because, hunting a wild boar was a potent symbol of elite male power. Bizarrely enough, even chariots became a massive status symbol in Greece. They painted them in all their elite artwork, completely ignoring the fact that the incredibly rocky Greek terrain made chariots largely useless for actual fighting.
Section 5. The Bronze Age Collapse.
So, the crucial point is this. Despite these massive standing armies, towering palace walls, and deeply interconnected wealth, none of it was built to last. In less than 200 years, this thriving global network was completely and utterly destroyed. The collapse was so swift, so total, and so catastrophic that we wouldn't see anything like it again until the fall of Rome 1,500 years later. So, why did they fall? Well, scholars believe there was no single cause, but rather a terrifying perfect storm of overlapping disasters. First, massive climate change brought persistent severe droughts, leading to widespread famine. When the elite couldn't feed the massive lower classes they relied on, the whole system buckled, sparking internal rebellion. Add to this massive earthquakes rocking Greece, literally toppling palaces filled with vats of olive oil and sparking raging fires. Then came the mysterious sea peoples, waves of unknown, disaffected invaders who raided the starving, weakened coastal cities. And finally, all of this chaos completely severed the fragile global trade routes these empires absolutely relied on to survive.
To truly wrap your head around this devastation, think about modern America's heavy dependence on oil from the Middle East. If you completely cut those supply routes today, our highly connected society is in massive, immediate trouble. The exact equivalent back then was their total dependence on tin coming from Afghanistan to make bronze. When the perfect storm hit and those specific trade routes were severed, the elites suddenly didn't have tin, which meant they didn't have bronze, which meant their entire military and economic power structure vanished overnight. Geographically, from Italy to Afghanistan, from Turkey to Egypt, it all went down.
and it went down hard.
Section 6. Lessons for our modern world.
When this highly globalized system failed, the central economies collapsed, the elites died off, and all that monumental architecture completely disappeared. For the next 300 years, the region plunged into the world's first dark age. Complex, interconnected societal structures were totally lost, and fragmented cultures went back to living much more simply. Because the palaces fell, the incredibly complex palace writing systems like Linear B vanished entirely. The lights literally turned out on our ability to read their history. However, there is actually a fascinating silver lining here. While the collapse was horrific for them, it wasn't the end of the world for us. Because the rigid, elite control of writing and culture was destroyed, it eventually cleared the way for something entirely new. 400 years later, the Greeks made contact with the Phoenicians, leading to the creation of the alphabet. Writing finally became accessible to the common man, planting the seeds for the birth of accessible Western civilization as we know it today.
But the story of the Bronze Age remains a profound cautionary tale. They learned the absolute hard way that every single technological innovation brings its own inherent fragilities. As their society became more advanced, they faced incredible vulnerabilities to climate, supply chains, and social inequality. So, it leaves us with this final, really urgent question to reflect on. As our own modern interconnected systems grow infinitely more complex and heavily reliant on global trade and technology, are we just building our own new perfect storm? It is a lesson from 5,000 years ago that we might want to pay very close attention to today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.